the Greenbelt isn't necessary to build housing. But I think to someone who hasn't spent too much time thinking about it, who hasn't heard too much about this, that sounds kind of logical, right? And I think that's where kind of all of us come in, is having these conversations with our neighbors and having these conversations with our friends and family to get the real facts and the real information.
Good evening, everyone. We're thrilled to have you here with us this evening. You can go on up, Victor. We're going to be a little bit informal tonight. I would just like to say that when this event was in the planning stages, the landscape for the Greenbelt looked very different than it does today. We were in the midst of a very different moment, one that we will all remember greatly. But this evening is no less important as a result. And what we're going to do is begin with a few short presentations from each of our panelists here this evening. And then the four of us are going to have a conversation. And I have to say, congratulations to Sergio for getting the four of us on the stage together, because I honestly feel like, I'll be a bit bold and say this, like, this is the dream team. This is the Greenbelt dream team on this stage right now. And so I'm really, really excited to be here with these three folks who've played such a critical role, both in the past, present, and future with respect to the Greenbelt. So we're going to kick off from hearing from Victor. Victor's going to tell us a little bit about the inception of the Greenbelt, how the Greenbelt got established, a little bit of the historical context. We're going to hear, following from David Crombie, who's going to talk about the regional perspective and also the implications of the Greenbelt in terms of our growth trajectory as a thriving region. And then we're going to hear from Emma, and Emma's going to kick off speaking a little bit about the more recent controversy, what's happened very recently, and where we find ourselves in this very moment today, including a discussion of some of the risks, what do we have to be keeping our eye on, and where we go from here. So without further ado, we're going to hear from Victor to kick this session off.
Ontario, yay! The Premier said it's a huge province, and it certainly is, but only 5% of Ontario is actually capable of supporting agriculture. Most of it is far north and not suitable for growing food. And agriculture is a fundamental component of the Greenbelt, and I just wanted to touch upon that because protecting our farmland was really important when we were developing the Greenbelt. We've lost 40% of our agricultural land in Canada over the years, and we're still losing it at a rapid pace. 500,000 acres over the last 5 years. It's completely unsustainable, and the Greenbelt was to permanently protect it. It's the second or third largest sector of our economy, the agri-food sector generally, and employs 750,000 people, way more than the auto sector. It's fundamentally important both for food security, jobs, economics, and feeding ourselves. And so we had the best agricultural experts in Ontario come to the table to share their information and analysis and data with us. It was the most comprehensive agricultural study ever done. They looked at soil, climate, productivity, farm infrastructure, farm productivity. It was incredible. So for the Premier to call the Greenbelt a scam is really ignoring and disparaging the work of these people. There's the Greenbelt itself. Yay, 2 million acres of permanently protected land. Well, it was supposed to be permanently protected. Most of it is prime agricultural land. I'm just going to go back a slide too. The other big color you see on this is blue, the beautiful Great Lakes. 1/5 of the world's surface fresh water on our doorstep. Incredible blessing, but also a moral obligation to protect that. And what happens on the land has direct consequences for the health of the Great Lakes. And the Greenbelt was all about protecting the water within the landscape that it covers. And yet urbanization continues, and we've been hearing more and more about it. And so the Greenbelt was really about where we shouldn't have major urbanization. And we looked at how much growth we're going to have, 5 million more people over the next 30 years. And we left lots of land outside of the Greenbelt to accommodate the housing we need to accommodate those people. Any notion that we don't have land to accommodate those and many, many millions more is simply not true. We don't need to take 1 acre out of the Greenbelt to provide for housing. It was looked at in detail. So collectively, we had experts, water experts, food and agricultural experts, growth management experts, biologists, et cetera. Literally thousands of years of combined experience designing the Greenbelt. And so far from being a scam, it's a very well-researched, thought-out, and important initiative that we should be all proud of. It's the biggest and most strongly protected in the world. Thanks.
By the way, Victor was there on a regular basis for week after week, month after month, year after year, that the Greenbelt was actually delivered. So I don't know if you realize that you're in the company of a person who did make such a contribution. So I just thought I'd mention that. Yeah. It also allows me to remind us that the building of the Greenbelt was a terrific historical accomplishment of the province of Ontario. It took a dream for about 40 years of people and organizations, thousands and thousands and thousands of people who had an interest in bringing together the important things for us: economy, ecology, and community. And the Greenbelt itself and the Greater Golden Horseshoe, of which it's a part, is the legacy that we've got from the work that those people did. And I might add, not just as thousands of people and hundreds of communities, but it was also all political parties. It's worth remembering. All political parties supported the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt was made up of basically 4 plans. 1, the Niagara Escarpment Plan of 1983. Took you right from Lake Erie to the top of the Bruce Peninsula. In 2002, the Oak Ridges Moraine along the top. Used to be called the Rain Barrel of Toronto. And then in 2005 and 2006, you had the Growth Plan and the Green Plan. Those 4 plans make up the Greenbelt and the basic environmental and land use planning for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. There was also a review of all of that in 2015 and to 2017, made of an independent panel from all sectors, 87 recommendations on how to make the Greenbelt better. And it was unanimous by the independent panel. All of that was rejected by the current government. When they were elected in 2018, they began a process of weakening and ultimately destroying the Greenbelt. That may sound harsh as a judgment, but I have no doubt that that's the truth. And they began by a series of legislative pieces, regulatory changes, and so on. They brought in new ideas about what they want to do with the conservation authorities, and they weakened the conservation authorities. They undermined the authority of the conservation authorities, and we depend on the conservation authorities and have depended on them for 75 years to deliver the goods on quality care with respect to our environment. They also decided that they would not have to worry about public processes, and so they used a thing known as and you'll see it in the paper, the MZO. That's the Ministerial Zoning Order. We used to use them maybe 3 times a year for really important things that were being held back. These guys in the current government use it like it's water, because the MZO allows the minister to decide. There's no public process and there's no appeal. So I could go on, and I want to make one point at the end before I sit down. The most egregious thing that they did, other than the 4 or 5 things that I could have mentioned, is that they decided they were going to take a daylight raid on the Dufferin Agricultural Preserve, the Dufferin Rouge Agricultural Preserve. It was such an egregious, such a gross thing that they finally had to back away and said, we're not going to put any housing there. We've saved the Greenbelt. They haven't, because although they may not be doing much there, don't know for sure, but we'll take them, close quote, at their word. The fact of the matter is they are still in the MZO business. They are still weakening conservation authorities. They are still trying to expand urban boundaries in order to help, and here, let me say it clear, in order to help their friends in the land speculation business. So I know, I'm aware after many, many years that people think I'm Mr. Cheery, nice guy. I know that. I got a happy gene. But I'll tell you, there's nothing ever bothered me more in my life than what these people in this government are doing to the biggest event that we created for ourselves and for future generations in the history of this province. So don't let these people take it away. They're not to be trusted, so weigh everything they say. We got big work ahead of us.
Hi. I'm not going to be that fiery. I'm but a modest reporter. But I thought maybe we could just chat about why we're here today, like right now, right this second, and everything that kind of happened in the last year to bring us this moment. So about 11 months ago, Premier Doug Ford, late on a Friday night, let out that he was going to cut into the Greenbelt that, as Victor said, was supposed to be protected forever. And that has opened an absolute Pandora's box of many, many things in almost a year since then. 2 weeks after that announcement was made, I, working with journalists at the Toronto Star, published an investigation into developer land holdings in the Greenbelt, which showed that a lot of the land that was opened up sure seemed to belong to people who were well connected. And in the ensuing months, basically chaos happened. The province's Auditor General started investigating it, so did our Integrity Commissioner. The OPP started talking about maybe looking at things a little bit closer. And the fruits of that really started to come out, 2 months ago now? Longest 2 months of my life. When the Auditor General dropped like an earth-shattering bombshell of a report detailing, how would you guys summarize it? I don't even know where to begin. It was like a Hollywood narrative. Developers passing packages to political staff at industry dinners, lobbyist asks becoming law, just copy and paste it over. And then if that wasn't enough, the Integrity Commissioner dropped the double whammy a couple days later. The backlash got so intense that the Premier has now announced that he's going to walk that back. We haven't seen it actually enshrined in law yet. But the details of this thing have been crazy. There's a character named Mr. X. Maybe we'll talk about him tonight. I don't know. But a lot has happened. And I think as we wait for the government to put in the regulation that will restore the Greenbelt back to normal, or at least what it was in 2017, I think the story still isn't over. And that's why we're here to talk about it now. When I said Pandora's box, I meant it. This thing has uncovered so many holes in things we thought were solid. Our politicians' ethics rules have now been shown to be pretty much a sham, full of loopholes and things that people can get away with. We now know that all the things that went wrong with the Greenbelt also went wrong with other things, with planning in a whole bunch of cities all around the Greater Toronto Area. And we also know, on top of all that, that the Premier has been deleting emails and not using his government phone, and that there are all these things going on to hide from the public what's been happening in our government. And so that's why I'm hoping you're all here, because maybe, I don't know, the last couple months in Ontario politics have made you all care about land use planning too. And maybe it won't just be the four of us ranting to our friends and family, who really could use a break from it probably. That now that we're aware that these things matter and they matter to us, like David said, there's more work to do.
So the first thing I'll ask is, how many people have been in the Greenbelt and have known when they're in the Greenbelt? Put your hand up. Okay, so most of the room. How many people have attended a presentation on the Greenbelt in the past? Any? A few. Okay, not too many. How many people here have been following over the course of the past 2 months the explosive details of the Auditor General's report? How many people? Okay, everyone in the room. So in some ways that actually reinforces the power of an informed public, is that you get outcomes like we've seen over the past couple of weeks with a retraction and an apology. And so I think that reinforces the importance of all of us being in the room tonight. What I'd like to do is, and I wanted to ask one more question. How many people in the room know what an MZO is? If you know, put your hand up. Okay, about a third of the room. How many people didn't, of those people who raised their hand, did you know what an MZO was 2 months ago? A few people did. Probably a few people did, but not everyone. So I just want to say, never in my wildest dreams would land use planning become so sexy. But it's happening, and I'm here for it. I'm completely here for it when MZO gets put into the everyday language. And to Mayor Crombie's point, when I was at the city as chief planner, we had, I think, 2 MZOs over a 5-year period that we requested of the province. So part of what's new that's happening today is that MZOs are going against the local government. And for those who don't know what an MZO is, the title, as David explained, is a ministerial zoning order, and it's essentially taking decision-making about land use planning that is at the municipal level and bringing that up to the minister. And so it's taking away those powers on a decision around what would typically go through a very public process and a process that is enshrined in the Planning Act, taking that away from the municipality and in fact making it the purview of the minister to make a decision. So you can see how we started to get into trouble here with the use of MZOs. So the first question I'm going to put out to our panelists here, this has been referred to as one of the most significant greenbelts in the entire world, a terrific accomplishment that spanned political parties. And now we find ourselves in a situation where there has been this incredibly egregious dynamic where flagrantly the government has sought to upend all of that. The first question I want to ask is one about process. There was a historical process, a due diligence process. The other end of the spectrum, what we've been through, what we've seen exposed over the course of the past several months is really a lack of process. A lot of untoward things happening behind closed doors. So my question for the panelists is, when you look at the past and you look at where we are today, and we think about some of the process things that we got right and we got wrong, could you please comment on the parts, both of those things, what we got right, what we got wrong, and where we're going to go eventually with this is, we're going to wrap this up by actually talking about where we need to go from here to ensure that we remain in a process that is going to protect, really, the word stewardship that Victor used is an important one, protect this incredible resource. So maybe we'll start with you, Victor, and just let's start with, because this is a big governance issue, it's a big process issue.
Yeah, historically, big initiatives like this and taking land out of the Greenbelt would be led by some sort of advisory group with all sort of sectors, including the development sector. There would be a widespread consultation with public meetings, all beforehand. In this case, I would argue there was no process whatsoever. What we've discovered is there was developers making their individual aspirations known to select individuals in the political machinery of the government, and there was no process. So I don't think there could be any more clear difference than that.
I think the only thing I could probably add to it is that this is a government that is not interested in process. So it's hard to get them onto it. And I'm not sure how you might do that. My own view is that the argument that we should be saying to them, gee, government, you should have a better process. I think we're past all of that. They are not capable of engendering a process that's fair and independent and honest, in my own judgment. That's why I think that the real action has got to be that we push the government as far as we can by public opinion to do with the other things like the MZOs and the boundary expansions and all of those things, what they were forced to do with respect to the Dufferin Rouge Agricultural Preserve. They were not pushed by seeing the light. They were pushed by feeling the heat. And I think they need heat. Hopefully I don't know if heat brings light, but that would be nice. Yeah.
Well, let me just pick up on that before we get to Emma, because it strikes me that over the course of many, many years, there has been a broad constituency of various groups, the Greenbelt Foundation, alliances, the conservation authorities, that have all been working towards alignment around the protection of the Greenbelt and building public awareness. Did we get in this situation today because we didn't know enough? Like, were we caught unaware? Was that part of the problem here, or is this just a government that was acting flagrantly?
There's a government that's acting flagrantly. I don't want to move away from that point. I mean, right up until 2017, we had the participation for keeping the Greenbelt and making it better. And that's the 87 recommendations made by the review committee of 2015 to 2017. Everybody agreed with that. It was agreed by everybody. Then the government changed. So I know it's not Canadian to be so clear and hard about it. But the bad news came with the election of the government and their decision that they were going to weaken and even destroy the Greenbelt in the name of helping their friends in the land speculation business. That's the simple truth of it to me. Now, there are good people in the Conservative Party caucus. There are good people who are members of the Conservative Party. I know them. They supported me. I love them. But this government is causing us great harm, and the only way we're going to get it back is to keep pushing them to the path they should be on.
So when you've got a government that is causing harm, we like to hope that we have the government institutions in place to result in accountability. You hinted at this, Emma, in your opening comment about some gaps that we discovered through the Auditor General's report. So on the process side, thinking about what some of those gaps might be, what have we learned about our institutions and the checks and balances that we have to deal with, some flagrantly untoward behavior, if we take Mayor Crombie's point? What have we learned that is going to be relevant to the Greenbelt moving forward and protecting it permanently?
Well, I think that really the main thing that we learned is that our processes are very vulnerable to bad actors, and that our legal framework for keeping our politicians on the straight and narrow is essentially like a slice of Swiss cheese. It's just full of holes. And so to recap a little bit, what happened with the Greenbelt, in short, to summarize like a lot, was that developers made direct asks of the government, and one political staffer who was working mostly without supervision, allegedly, just signed off on those requests, and boom, there it was. I think we all know that that's not the way that's supposed to work. And I think we all like to trust that there are ethics rules in place. And lobbying is an insidious thing, right? I think a lot of the time when we hear about lobbying or political donations, we might think that those things are like a quid pro quo, or that the politician is bound to do what the lobbyists say. And I think it's actually something a lot more complicated, which is when a politician is in power and wholeheartedly agrees with those special interests surrounding them, that's better than any $1,000 political donation. That's someone who truly believes what they're saying and truly wants to do it. It's not about any monetary gain necessarily. And that's, I think, really the place where we need to be careful and pay attention. I mean, what we learned here is that these special interests were able to access the government in a way that you and I cannot. And we've learned that, for the most part, our law is okay with that. There was one incident where developers were attending a stag and doe party with the premier's daughter. They were giving her cash gifts, and that is allowed under our ethical regime. That's something to think about. I think, like, in a broader sense, we also need to start pointing some accountability towards the other people who are supposed to act as checks and balances in these situations. Every minister who was sitting around the cabinet table either failed to ask the right questions about this plan or signed off on it without asking questions. That should be so deeply concerning to every single one of us, frankly. And so I think the public accountability side comes in too, right? We've seen what people power can do in terms of convincing the government to reverse a decision. I would love to see that pointed in the direction of lobbying reform, as sexy as that sounds, and ethics reform, because we've got to do something. If voter turnout is going to continue to be a problem like it was in the last election, we have to find other ways to hold our politicians accountable.
So let's pick up on that theme of some of the players who influence public policy, because, Victor, where you're coming from, it's a very technical exercise, how you create public policy, right? You're looking at land, you're looking at a whole variety of considerations, from geology to the prime agricultural land. And then on the way on the other side of the spectrum, you have lobbyists, and you have, I would also argue, playing an outsized role in our province is PR firms. Public relation firms are on steroids right now, battling to own the message. And part of the message around this was a message around housing, which resonates with people. So can we talk about that tension a little bit of, on the one hand, you've got the technical part of the making and the protecting of the Greenbelt, and on the other hand, in direct contrast to it, you have lobbyists and you have PR firms that are exerting influence on politicians. And there's a problem here, and I think in our best case scenario, we have technical people who are analyzing and making recommendations to government, and in our worst case scenario, we have people that are being paid to represent a certain interest. Could you talk a little bit about, in the early days of forming the Greenbelt, wasn't it a problem then? Just like it's a problem today, that you had farmers who owned land who wanted to flip it for a lot of money? Like, this isn't a brand new problem.
No, lands, they aren't making any more of it, and it's very valuable, and there's huge money and power involved. So it's an age-old issue. I think it's the world's oldest profession, frankly. But different governments react differently, and some of them show a lot more integrity. And just so you know, the Auditor General complimented the media because they are a key cog in the accountability wheel. Another cog are civil servants. Believe it or not. So we give advice to elected officials at whatever level of government, and my own view is, and I've fought for this for years, that should be public information so that you, as citizens, know what your experts are telling your politicians, because you're paying our salaries, right? So Stephen Harper won't let our climate change scientists tell us if the ice caps are melting. Well, I want to know, and then I want to judge him and his government on what they do. So I think the civil service, making their advice known publicly, with some confidential stuff, but generally, is another cog in the accountability wheel. And if governments go off stream and do crazy things like this one, people are going, what's going on? And then they vote accordingly come election time.
I think maybe just to jump off of that, one important aspect too is like the people who are in the rooms making these decisions, making recommendations. At some point, people have to walk away, right? If something is being done, and it's difficult to be a whistleblower or to stand up in those situations. But I go back to those cabinet ministers sitting around the table. Every single one of them signed off on it, right? So anyway, that's just what that made me think of.
Yeah, I find that, that's a really startling observation. The complicity, think of a board of management. Those are those cabinet ministers. Everyone sat around the table and was like, it's okay. Can you comment on that? You've sat at those tables.
Sure, but I think we get far too complicated about who's responsible. There is no doubt who's responsible for the Greenbelt and decisions being made for its well-being or not the well-being of it. And that's the provincial cabinet. That's no doubt about that. They have the legal responsibility. So, thank you. They do. And I want to make sure we're clear on one point. All the advice that Richard and all of his people who gave all those years in the Greenbelt and all the technical advice that came from planners and so on, all of that is absolutely essential. They are not, however, accountable. They're not accountable. And the only people who are accountable are those who are elected under our system. That's what makes it a democracy. If you don't do that, don't call it a democracy. They are responsible. And I might add, I don't know what the actual process was when the government finally decided that they were going to back out of DRAP. But my guess is the only body that they will pay attention to, and one that I commend to you, if you know anybody there, get at them, is the Tory caucus. The government caucus of the day has a power that we don't normally see. And I think they probably had something to say to the Premier and his cabinet when they had their Wednesday morning or whatever it is, caucus meeting. In our system, the government caucus is a powerful body that we don't know much about. And it's never going to change, so you have to make sure they got enough heat on them to make the decision we want. That's what makes it accountable. The development industry is not accountable. Speculators are not accountable. It's those guys we elect, those men and women who are elected. They are accountable, and it's them who have to learn about what they ought to be doing from us.
So let's pick up on that theme of accountability. Accountability implies that there is a public interest, right? That you're sitting at the table, you've taken the oath of office, you've said that you will serve the people of Ontario. Planners take an oath as well to serve the public. Lawyers, interestingly, do not, but planners do. Lawyers serve their clients. Planners have an oath not to the government. Planners have an oath to the broader public interest. I'd like to just pick up on this question of accountability and the public interest, and also inject a word here that Victor raised, which is stewardship, because we live in a remarkable place in the world, the Great Lakes region. And I remember vividly the first project I did at school where I drew out the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes actually define us. And I'm not sure that if you would ask the average person on the street, that they would say protecting the Great Lakes, protecting our natural habitat ought to be our #1 priority. Although the people on the stage and maybe the majority of the people in the room might see this as being absolutely critical. And the twisting on the PR side that happened in this was about the housing crisis, that the housing crisis superseded protecting the birds and the bees. Can we just untangle that question a little bit of what is the accountability? Because I think the government tried very hard to build a narrative which the great due diligence, technical due diligence took down, that this land was needed for housing, and that those two objectives of housing versus environment actually were in conflict with each other. Can we talk about this question of the public interest? What is the public interest? Who gets to decide? Who's accountable? How does that accountability actually get secured?
I can go.
Emma, you go.
Well, so I think a huge part of this is that so many of us have been kind of sleepwalking into the housing crisis we have now, right? If there are any renters in the room, We know, and if you tried to buy a house recently, you know, but we're all bogged down with so much, right? There's COVID, there are other affordability crises. We're all overwhelmed with pretty much everything all the time. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. And it's hard to ask people to get involved in the nuts and bolts of like their local housing policy on top of that. I mean, we're a bunch of nerds in here, but I think it's really tough to ask people to make that type of time commitment, and especially in a time when local media coverage has been declining. It's really, really hard to get good information to people, right? I mean, I think most of us in here know that the Greenbelt isn't necessary to build housing, but I think to someone who hasn't spent too much time thinking about it, who hasn't heard too much about this, that sounds kind of logical, right? And I think that's where kind of all of us come in, is having these conversations with our neighbors and having these conversations with our friends and family to get the real facts and the real information. I mean, you can read my articles if you want, I'll just tell you. But there's a lot of spin out there. I mean, some of these developers have been selling the lie that the Greenbelt is necessary to build housing for decades now, since the second the thing was inked in. And that's a very difficult thing to combat, but not to keep turning it over to you guys, but I really think conversations like this have to be part of it, because people have to know, right? There's no other way to combat it. We can't sleepwalk anymore. It's situation critical. And we have to tackle competing crises at the same time if we have any hope.
Yeah, I said earlier that it's up to the politicians to make the final judgment. They listen to the experts, listen to their public, and make a decision. That's the simple way. That's the simple core of what's required. In order for people to be part of all of that, they have to have the information. And Victor was onto that, and I think Emma just mentioned it again. It's the holding back of information. It's not the whole reason why we're not getting the right ones, but it's a big one. We've got into the habit, and I'm old enough to be able to say this, in the past generation or two, whereby we allowed governments to say, that's a secret, not your business, right? That's unacceptable. The idea that your elected politicians can sign confidentiality agreements so that they're not going to speak to the public is bizarre.
That happened with the Greenbelt, by the way.
It's absolutely bizarre. The whole point of the politician is to be able to represent the public to the government and the reverse. And if somehow you can sign away that's signing away a democratic right. They don't have the right to do that. We've somehow accepted the proposition that it's okay for government to hold secrets. It is if it's got to do for a small selected number of reasons about people's reputations and so on and so forth. But we've got into the habit that it's okay for governments to not tell you. I mean, it's not related to this, but closely. Phil Vorster, is that his name? Mm-hmm. Vorster, who's the head of Metrolinx, the other day said, I think I know, but I'm not going to tell you when it's possible we could have the Eglinton LRT finished. Who the hell's he to say that? What do you mean? He's not. So we have accepted too easily the proposition, and we should not. We should say, no, we're not going to accept the idea that you can sign away your democratic responsibility to let us know what's going on.
Have we accepted that? So I think that was something that we learned in this expose that NDAs had been signed. But that was news to me. Is this a broader practice?
Well, it's become one. It's become one. I mean, people have accepted that, and we got to fight back. Say, no, that's not possible.
If
Victor?
I can jump in. Sorry, Victor, and I'll be fast. As someone who is constantly trying to pry secrets away from the government, it's really at a point where public institutions see information as like a pile of gold that they're guarding. It's like their stuff and we want it. And I think the fundamental idea that this information belongs to all of us has been so lost. Again, like we've kind of been sleepwalking into this gradual erosion of our rights and our rights to know what our governments are doing. And I guess just to keep going back to it, we really need to demand better. We've seen what we can do. So go ahead, Victor. Sorry.
Victor is going to respond, and then we're going to take some questions from the floor.
I'll just say education and awareness raising is fundamental in whatever sector you're involved in. And the development industry isn't accountable. They're kind of like big tobacco. You can't really believe everything they say. They don't have our best interests at heart. And you should be aware that the government is now proposing a lot of changes to our water laws and regulations, and really talking about having far less oversight over sewage treatment, stormwater, water taking. Conservation authorities won't be informed of these things. It's bizarre. But Ontario Place, whether you like this proposal or not, the government won't tell us what the terms of the deal are. So how can we even possibly begin to understand whether we like it at a more detailed level? So accountability is fundamental, and it's important for you all and us when we vote. We need to know what's going on so we can vote in an informed way.